So it's election season, and the ANC and SACP have decided to bury the hatchet and put up a united front ahead of this year's local government election. SACP General Secretary Nzimande yesterday urging members to ensure a decisive victory for the ANC on election day. Nzimande says this is not a blank cheque, but an opportunity for the ANC to honour its commitments to addressing its weaknesses. Let's unpack the story for you now. We're joined by the SACP's first Deputy General Secretary, Mapaila, this morning. He joins us via our video line in Durban. Solly, it's great to have you with us on the show this morning on what is an incredibly important story in the build-up to elections, and that line in particular from what Nzimande had to say, that this is not a blank cheque, it's an opportunity for the ANC to honour its commitment in addressing its own weaknesses. That is, on the face of it, given the challenges the governing party is facing, that's a tall order.
Good morning, Michelle, and good morning to our viewers. Yes, indeed, that's very important and a tall order, but something that is achievable. And we believe that the ANC has the possibility to do so. That's why we've re-emphasized the fact that the necessity to work together in a reconfiguration of the alliance, in which the ANC can not only take decisions on its own, but can understand the impact those decisions it takes has on our revolution as a whole and the agenda that we have to transform our society, that is our revolution, that we have to have a collective view in that regard. And we have seen, for instance, how in the area we launched our campaign in January, where in the last few years, in the last local government election, there's been violence. But when we started working together, the community overwhelmingly supported our candidate. In fact, it was one of the highest turnout areas in the rest of the province of KwaZulu-Natal with regard to community turnout. As you know, the ANC in this process has allowed communities to select its own candidate. In other words, the ANC ward candidates are selected directly by the community. So they are part and parcel of the ownership of the process of the democratization, internal democratization of not only the ANC, but of society. And therefore, this is one other good step for the ANC to begin internal rectification process.
I mean, you've mentioned one of the issues, and that is around the candidate list process, which the ANC itself has also been sort of shouting the trumpet around in terms of how it's trying to do things differently. But there's a lot of anger insofar as the candidate list process is concerned still in many communities around the country, Solly. You talked about this belief that the SACP has, that the ANC has the ability to rectify its own weaknesses. And I want to ask you, on what basis does the SACP have that belief, given the levels of factionalism in the governing party, the corruption within its own ranks, political violence, again, that we're seeing in the lead-up to these elections, as we saw in 2016, and the issue that you just mentioned as well around the candidate list process?
Yes, there has been some unfortunate incidences. As you know, we've also visited the families in Inanda, the three families who lost their loved ones when they were attending a community meeting and they were murdered. And I think that's an unfortunate incident, and we have called on the police to deepen their investigation as well as to support those families, particularly with services, because at the moment, not even social workers have visited those families. We think that they will be attending to that matter as soon as is possible. But the internal ranklings have actually been subverted by the overwhelming community support to the process, as we have seen, for instance, in China, for instance, where the community as a whole had a particular candidate. The organization also had its own candidate, but the community overwhelmingly decided on who their candidate is. So the community, when it participates effectively in a process of this nature, overwhelms the witnesses in the ANC. Nonetheless, the ANC going forward still has to come in, and rectify these processes. But at the moment, we want to focus on winning the elections, because the elections are an important tool in the hands of the organization to transform the society. As we have said, and we want to re-emphasize this, no other organization in this country has a thoroughgoing transformation agenda of our society than what the ANC has. And we don't want to reverse the gains we've made since our democracy, but we want to continue on those gains and consolidate on them That's why we have also decided to work together with the ANC to repel the threat that is there that can stagnate the development of our country. And therefore, we are calling on a rollout, for instance, on infrastructure program. We are calling on a rollout and expansion of public works program with decent jobs in that particular agenda. We are calling for transformation of the financial sector, the rollout of the national insurance, health insurance, which will strengthen our capacity for our health system to respond to diseases, including this COVID-19. And we've also made a strong call to our communities to vaccinate. Of course, we adopted a new slogan, vaccinate and vote ANC, and vice versa. So these are some of the messages that we are taking to our communities in these last few weeks before the November 1 election.
Solly, I'm gonna ask you this question again, because I think it's the big question that very many South Africans are facing in the build-up to local government elections, as they decide how to cast their ballots on the 1st of November. What is it that the ANC has done? And I'm not just talking about service delivery, although in a local government election, that most certainly is the most important issue, the record of the delivery of services. But what has the party itself done for it to warrant asking the electorate to trust it again?
No, there's too much, Michelle, that the ANC has done. And I think that because of internal weaknesses in recent time of factionalism, they've undermined the major successes that we have scored. If you look into all key major components of development indexes, whether it's life expectancy, we have seen increases. Of course, COVID-19 will have reduced that, but generally, we have seen increase in life expectancy, which is a very important, strong measure. We have seen improvement in health services in our communities, in provision of things like sanitation, water and electricity, scaling up at a much more faster pace. We've seen a building of millions of houses for the poor, sustainability of our communities, particularly the poor, with the support mechanism, including a variety of social security measures in the forms of social grants. They may not be enough in terms of the actual quantity of the funds, but these interventions are extremely important. Our people will be extremely overwhelmed by poverty. Had it not been this kind of intervention, but the ANC has intervened. And of course, the greatest achievement of the ANC is to unite the country and to roll out an inclusive democratic system, inclusive of black and white and all colors in our country, combined in a national effort to build a united country. At the moment, no other country has that capacity to do so than the ANC. That's why we feel that we must strengthen its ability to govern our society and equally attend to concurrent problems that it faces.
Some heavy losses, if we think back to the 2016 municipal polls, Solly. Are there any measures in place? Should we see a repeat of what happened in 2016? Of course, the aim in these elections really in many respects is to win back some of those big metros that were lost in the 2016 municipal polls. And Gauteng is, of course, key to that. We think about Ekurhuleni, Tshwane, Johannesburg. What happens if there are not those successes insofar as winning back some of those metros? If we think about the Western Cape, for example, having some kind of a presence in Cape Town in particular again, insofar as governance is concerned?
Well, Michelle, we want to look forward positively about the successes. For instance, if you look in Gauteng, the best-run metro, it's Ekurhuleni under the ANC leadership. And I think we must commend the progress made in that municipality. We've seen deteriorating conditions of the people in the greater Tshwane area, as well as some parts of Johannesburg. We reclaimed Johannesburg in the last 2 years, and we have seen the reversals that have been made. We've seen the reversals in the Port Elizabeth region, and I think that is Nelson Mandela region, metro. And of course, in Cape Town, the working class there is suffering. And I think it is these realities that have now exposed our people to what the reversals can mean. You must remember that these metros control over 70% of local government budgets, and therefore their impact on quality of services is too huge, and majority of them now were out of the hands of the ANC. And I think that it's important that the people make this particular connection about our ability to govern, both from national as well as the relationship of that national intervention with local government system. And in this regard, we have seen overwhelming negligence of working class communities by in the Western Cape, for instance, and Nelson Mandela Metro and Tshwane, the DA coalitions, that has spectacularly failed to deliver services. And on the contrary, they've been hiding, creating an impression that these difficulties are created by national government, when actually they are the ones that are leading in these particular communities. In Tshwane, in Cape Town, in Nelson Mandela Metro, overwhelming problems are caused by this local government system. They are not taking responsibility as the opposition parties. We are taking responsibility. We are leading. We are showing example. Our metros are well governed, like Ekurhuleni is the best governed metro at the moment, responsive and almost becoming much more independent local government system, which is what our people need.
You know, Solly, I asked the ANC the same question, and I'm going to put it to you as well, around, you know, the kind of rhetoric that we're hearing for these local government elections. Let's talk about the governing party, because that is the topic of our discussion this morning. Insofar as service delivery is concerned, the rhetoric that we're hearing for these polls is remove the Democratic Alliance, for example, in Tshwane, because it has a bad service delivery record. When in fact there are a number of ANC-led municipalities around the country who themselves have bad service delivery records. What is it about these elections that means the opposition should be removed, the ANC should be put in place, when the ANC's record itself, insofar as service delivery is concerned, is not a rosy one?
Michelle, I think I've just indicated, for instance, the relationship between local government budgets and the metros. And the metros that are currently having more than half of the local government budgets in this country are in the hands of the opposition, and they are not taking responsibility for their failures. That's the honest truth. And I think until we go deeper into that particular issue, we'll continue to skate around. If you see, for instance, some of the networks now, I was happy one day I saw one of your journalists asking John Steinhazen in Cape Town about the neglect of the places like Khayelitsha, Gugulethu, and Langa, and why they were not, Michel's Plain, why the services are poor in those areas. And he basically said, no, there's no funds, as if in other areas there are funds. But when he's confronted with the truth and the reality on the ground, he's unable to account for the failures of the DA in some of those areas. So therefore, it's not just this broad impression that is created that there's been a failure. We've seen good improvements in key metros. And of course, like we've said, predicating this thing on a capitalist economy is also not helpful. That is why we need an economy that is public sector-led, that is publicly accountable, rather than rely exclusively on the capitalist system to save our economy, when it has actually shown its inability to do so. You need much more dominant role of the public sector intervention as an economy, as well as through strengthening the local government system. Hence, we have called on the support for the district development model as rolled out by President Cyril Ramaphosa across the country, because it brings together all spheres of government to concentrate and integrate the interventions that government makes at the district level, and therefore consolidate the quality of services to our communities. Hence, we have also called on a massive rollout of infrastructure programs that we also believe will create more jobs.
Solly Mapaila is the SACP's first Deputy General Secretary. Thanks very much indeed for joining us this morning. The ANC and the SACP putting up a united front ahead of these local government elections.